The thing about discovering your wife's affair is that it never happens like in the movies. There's no dramatic music, no slow motion revelation, no perfectly timed confrontation. Instead, you're standing in your own kitchen at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, listening to your wife giggle into her phone like a teenager while she thinks you're upstairs getting dressed for work. "No, he's completely clueless," Allison whispered, her back turned to me as she stirred her coffee. "Trust me, Paul wouldn't notice if I tattooed 'cheater' across my forehead." I froze halfway down the stairs, my engineering brain immediately cataloging evidence I'd been too stupid to see. The late-night client meetings. The new lingerie that never made appearances in our bedroom. The way she'd started locking her phone. "Trent, you're terrible," she continued, and I felt my stomach drop into my work boots. Trent Collins, her so-called business partner at the real estate firm, the guy with the Range Rover and the spray tan who always found excuses to drop by our house when I wasn't home. My name is Paul Garrett, and up until that moment, I thought I had a pretty good life. Decent job as a petroleum engineer, nice house in West Houston's most desirable suburb, 2 beautiful daughters, and a wife who sold million-dollar homes to oil executives and their trophy wives. Sure, Allison had been distant lately, but I figured it was work stress. The real estate market was competitive, and she'd been putting in long hours. Turns out those long hours weren't spent showing houses. I backed up the stairs quietly, my mind racing. 20 years of marriage. And this is what it had come to. My wife discussing my obliviousness with her lover while I got ready for another day of pretending everything was normal. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days calculating pressure differentials and flow rates, solving complex engineering problems that could prevent disasters. But I couldn't figure out that my own marriage was a ticking time bomb. I made enough noise coming down the stairs the second time to announce my presence. Allison quickly ended her call and turned around with that practiced smile she'd perfected for difficult clients. "Morning, honey," she said, kissing my cheek with lips that had probably been whispering sweet nothings to another man. "You're running late." "Traffic's light today," I replied, studying her face. How had I missed the signs? The way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes anymore. The defensive posture whenever I asked about her day. The fact that she'd stopped wearing her wedding ring, claiming it got in the way during house showings. "I might be late tonight," she continued, confirming my suspicions. "Big client meeting. You know how it is." "Sure," I said, pouring coffee into my travel mug. "With Trent?" She didn't even flinch. "Among others. It's a group presentation." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that I almost admired the technique. Almost. Our daughters, Mia and Lila, thundered down the stairs in that chaotic way kids do when they're running late for school. Mia, 10 years old and sharp as a tack, immediately sensed the tension. "Why are you guys being weird?" she asked, grabbing a piece of toast. "We're not being weird, sweetheart," Allison said, but her voice had that forced cheerfulness that kids can spot from a mile away. Lila, 7 and more sensitive than her sister, looked between us with worried eyes. "Are you fighting?" "Of course not, baby," I said, kneeling down to her level. "Mommy and Daddy are just tired. Big people stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." But as I looked into my younger daughter's eyes, I realized she'd been worrying for a while. Kids notice everything, even when adults think they're being subtle. How long had my girls been living with the tension of their parents' failing marriage? After I dropped the kids at school, I sat in my truck in the parking lot and tried to process what I'd overheard. Part of me wanted to confront Allison immediately, to demand explanations and apologies. But the engineer in me knew better. You don't make major decisions based on incomplete data. I needed proof. My best friend Benny Rodriguez had always said I was too trusting for my own good. Benny was an ex-cop who'd retired early after taking a bullet in the shoulder during a domestic violence call. He now ran a small security consulting business and had offered more than once to check up on things if I ever had suspicions about Allison. I'd always laughed off his offers, secure in my belief that my wife would never cheat. Now I felt like the biggest fool in Harris County. I called Benny from the parking lot. Well, he answered on the second ring. "Paul Garrett calling before 8 a.m. Either someone died, or you finally figured out what the rest of us have been too polite to mention." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Your wife's been stepping out, brother. I've seen her car at that fancy hotel bar downtown more times than I can count. Always with the same guy. Tall, fake tan, drives like he's compensating for something." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. "How long have you known?" "Couple months. I kept hoping you'd figure it out on your own, or that she'd come to her senses. But Allison's always been selfish, Paul. Even back in college, she only cared about what served her interests." Benny was right. I'd met Allison in college, and even then, she'd been calculating. She'd dated the quarterback until he got injured, then moved on to the student body president. I'd been flattered when she'd finally noticed me during our senior year, especially after I'd landed a good job offer with an oil company. Looking back, the timing seemed less coincidental. I need evidence, I said. Something concrete. Leave that to me, but Paul, you need to prepare yourself. This isn't going to be just about the affair. Women like Allison don't just cheat, they plan exit strategies. Check your bank accounts, your credit cards, anything she might have access to. That afternoon, I left work early and went home to do exactly that. Over the past 6 months, Allison had been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into a personal account I didn't even know existed, small amounts at first, then larger ones. Nearly $50,000 had disappeared from our savings, along with chunks from our checking account that she'd disguised as business expenses. She wasn't just cheating, she was planning to leave and take as much as she could with her. I was still staring at the bank statements when I heard her car in the driveway. For a moment, I considered confronting her right then, laying out everything I'd discovered and demanding an explanation. But something held me back. Maybe it was the engineer in me, wanting to gather all the data before drawing conclusions. Or maybe it was the part of me that still hoped this was all a terrible misunderstanding. "You're home early," Allison said, walking into the kitchen where I sat with the laptop. "Slow day at the office," I replied, closing the computer. "How was your meeting?" "Productive?" she said, not elaborating. She looked flushed and slightly disheveled, her lipstick gone and her hair mussed in a way that made my stomach churn. "Good," I said. "We should talk about our finances soon." I noticed some unusual activity in our accounts. For just a second, her composure slipped. "What kind of activity?" "Large withdrawals, business expenses that seem higher than usual." "Oh, that." She waved dismissively. "New client acquisition costs. You know how it is in real estate. You have to spend money to make money." Another lie, delivered with the same practiced ease. I wondered how many others I'd swallowed over the years. That night, as Allison showered off the evidence of her afternoon activities, I lay in bed and tried to figure out my next move. I could hire a divorce lawyer, file papers, and start the legal process. But that felt too clean, too civilized for what she'd done to our family. Allison had spent months planning her betrayal, carefully positioning herself to leave with minimal consequences. She'd stolen our money, destroyed our marriage, and worst of all, she'd done it all while looking me in the eye and lying without hesitation. If she wanted to play games, I was ready to learn the rules. But first, I needed to know exactly how deep this betrayal went. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Allison left early for what she claimed was a breakfast meeting with potential clients, kissing me goodbye with the same casual affection she might show a roommate. As soon as her car disappeared around the corner, I called Benny. "I need your help," I said without preamble. "Full investigation. I want to know everything." "Already on it," he replied. "Meet me at Murphy's Diner in an hour. And Paul, bring your appetite for ugly truth, because what I've got isn't pretty." Murphy's was the kind of place where retired cops and private investigators conducted business over coffee and eggs. Benny had claimed a corner booth and was already working on his second cup when I arrived. "Sit down and brace yourself," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Your wife's been busy." The photographs inside made my hands shake. Allison and Trent entering the Marriott downtown, Allison and Trent at an expensive restaurant I'd never been to, Allison and Trent in what appeared to be a heated argument in a parking garage, her hand on his chest in a gesture that was anything but professional. "There's more," Benny said grimly. "The financial stuff you found? That's just the tip of the iceberg. She's been using business accounts to hide personal expenses. Expensive dinners, hotel rooms, a weekend trip to Austin that she told you was a real estate conference." I stared at a photo of my wife laughing at something Trent had said, her face animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. When was the last time she'd looked at me like that? "How long?" I asked. "Best I can tell, about 8 months. Started right after that company retreat they went on together." 8 months. I tried to remember what our marriage had been like 8 months ago. Had I noticed her pulling away? Had there been signs I'd missed, or had she simply gotten better at hiding her true feelings? "There's something else," Benny continued. "Like, I did some digging into Trent Collins. Guy's got a gambling problem. Owes money to some people you don't want to owe money to. Word is, he's been using company funds to cover his debts." "So he's embezzling?" "That's what it looks like. And if your wife knows about it, she could be in serious legal trouble. Conspiracy, accessory after the fact, who knows what else." The implications hit me like a freight train. Not only was Allison cheating and stealing from our family, but she might be involved in criminal activity that could destroy her career and land her in prison. "What do you want to do?" Benny asked. I thought about my daughters, about the life we'd built together, about 20 years of marriage reduced to a stack of incriminating photographs. Part of me still wanted to salvage something from the wreckage, to find a way to rebuild what we'd lost. But the larger part of me, the part that had been humiliated and betrayed and lied to for months, wanted justice. I want to destroy them, I said quietly. Both of them. Benny nodded approvingly. Now you're talking. But we do this smart, legal, and thorough. No half measures, no backing out once we start. You sure you're ready for that? I looked at the photos again, at my wife's face glowing with happiness as she betrayed everything we'd built together. I'm ready. The first step was securing my own financial position. With Benny's help, I moved our remaining joint funds into accounts that Allison couldn't access. I changed passwords, updated beneficiaries, and made sure she couldn't drain any more money while I planned my next move. Next, we documented everything. Every suspicious transaction, every lie she'd told me about her whereabouts, every piece of evidence that proved her affair. I felt like I was building a case against my own life, cataloging the destruction of my marriage with the same methodical precision I used to analyze pipeline systems. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal, coming home each evening to kiss the woman who was systematically destroying our family, making small talk about our days while knowing exactly how she'd spent her afternoon, lying in bed next to someone who'd become a stranger. 3 days into my investigation, Allison's behavior shifted. She became more attentive, more affectionate, asking about my work and suggesting we plan a weekend getaway. At first, I thought guilt might be motivating her sudden interest in our marriage. Then Benny called with disturbing news. She knows, he said. Someone tipped her off that you're investigating. She's been asking questions about divorce lawyers, asset protection, that sort of thing. How could she know? Could be a dozen ways. Maybe she noticed the missing money. Maybe Trent's getting paranoid. Maybe she just has good instincts. Either way, she's moving into damage control mode. That evening, Allison suggested we have dinner at Romano's, the expensive Italian place where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. She wore the black dress I'd bought her for her birthday, the one that used to be my favorite. We should do this more often, she said over wine, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I feel like we've been drifting apart lately. The irony was breathtaking. Here she was, acknowledging the distance between us while simultaneously being the cause of it. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but I forced myself to play along. I've been thinking the same thing, I said. Maybe we should plan that weekend trip you mentioned. Her smile seemed genuine, but I could see calculation behind her eyes. Was she trying to buy time to hide more assets? Planning to suggest marriage counseling to make herself look like the reasonable party in a potential divorce? I love you, Paul, she said as we left the restaurant. I know I haven't been the best wife lately, but I want to try harder. I love you too, I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how many other lies she'd told with such conviction. Had she ever really loved me, or had I always been just a means to an end? A stable provider who could give her the lifestyle she wanted while she looked for something better? The next morning brought a new development. Mia cornered me in the kitchen before school, her young face serious with concern. Dad, is Mom having problems at work? Why do you ask, sweetheart? She's been on the phone a lot, and yesterday I heard her crying in her office. She said something about everything being ruined. My 10-year-old daughter had noticed what I'd been too blind to see for months. The signs had been there all along. I'd just chosen to ignore them. Mom's just stressed about a big project, I said, hating myself for lying to my child. Everything's going to be fine. But everything wasn't going to be fine. As I dropped the girls at school, I realized that this situation was going to get much worse before it got better. Allison was cornered, desperate, and still had access to resources I might not know about. I called Benny from the school parking lot. Time to accelerate our timeline, I said. She's planning something, and I don't want to get caught off guard. Already ahead of you, he replied. Meet me at the office this afternoon. I've got something that's going to blow your mind. What Benny showed me that afternoon changed everything. Bank records, phone logs, email communications, a complete picture of my wife's double life that was far more extensive than I'd imagined. The affair with Trent was just the beginning. Benny's office looked like something out of a detective movie, with filing cabinets, surveillance equipment, and a wall covered in photographs connected by red string. In the center of it all was a timeline of my wife's betrayal that stretched back over a year. Sit down, Benny said grimly. This is going to hurt. The evidence he'd compiled was devastating. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between Allison and Trent starting 13 months ago. Credit card statements revealing expensive dinners, hotel stays, and shopping trips I'd never known about. Most damaging of all, email exchanges between Allison and her sister discussing her exit strategy from our marriage. Read this one, Benny said, pointing to a printed email dated 6 months earlier. Lisa, I know you think I'm being harsh, but Paul has become a burden. He's settled for mediocrity, and I refuse to do the same. Trent makes me feel alive again. Yes, there are challenges, but I'm managing them. By Christmas, I'll be free from this suburban prison and living the life I deserve. The words struck me like punches. Suburban prison, burden, mediocrity. This was how my wife of 20 years truly viewed our life together. There's more, Benny said, producing another document. She's been meeting with divorce attorneys for 3 months. Not just one, she's shopped around to find the most aggressive firm in the city. I scanned the consultation notes, seeing my life reduced to assets and liabilities. The house, my retirement accounts, my pension, everything cataloged and evaluated for maximum extraction. She'd even researched ways to claim spousal support based on her sacrifice of career advancement for family responsibilities. The gambling thing with Trent is worse than I thought, Benny continued. He's into loan sharks for over $200,000. Your wife's been helping him hide money from his creditors, which makes her an accessory to fraud. Can we prove that? Already have. Bank transfers, forged documents, the works. She's looking at serious jail time if this comes out. I stared at the evidence spread across Benny's desk, trying to reconcile the woman I'd married with the calculating stranger revealed in these documents. Had she always been this person, or had I failed her so completely that she'd transformed into someone unrecognizable? Paul, Benny said gently, there's one more thing. The worst thing. He handed me a folder marked personal. Allison and Trent at school events I'd missed due to work. Trent at our house, playing in the backyard with my daughters while I was at the office. Pictures of him at Mia's soccer games, sitting in the stands like a proud father. She's been positioning him as your replacement, Benny said. The girls know him, like him. In her mind, she's already moved on to the next phase of her life. The betrayal was complete. Not only had she stolen from me and lied to me, but she'd been grooming my daughters to accept another man in my place. The thought of Trent Collins sitting at my dinner table, sleeping in my bed, helping raise my children made me physically ill. What's the plan? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. We have enough evidence to destroy them both, Benny said. Criminal charges, civil suits, professional sanctions, the works. But you need to decide how far you want to take this. I thought about my daughters, the life they had known, and the inevitable fallout that would follow. Then I thought about the email describing our home as a suburban prison, about Trent playing catch with my kids while scheming to take my wife, about 20 years of marriage dismissed as a burden. All the way, I said. I want them to lose everything. The first phase of our counterattack was financial. Using the evidence Benny had gathered, I froze all joint accounts and filed for emergency asset protection. Within hours, Allison would find herself cut off from the money she'd been stealing. Phase 2 was professional. Benny had contacts at the Real Estate Commission who would be very interested in evidence of fraud and embezzlement. Both Allison and Trent's licenses would be suspended pending investigation. Phase 3 was personal. I was going to expose them to everyone who mattered, friends, family, colleagues, neighbors. They wanted to destroy my life in private while maintaining their public reputations. I was going to flip that equation. But first, I had to prepare for Allison's reaction. A cornered animal was dangerous, and my wife had already proven she was capable of elaborate deception. There was no telling what she might do when she realized her carefully laid plans were unraveling. I came home to find Allison cheerful, cooking pot roast and pouring expensive wine. "What's the occasion?" I asked. "No occasion." "Can't a wife cook for her husband?" She looked radiant, and for a moment I remembered why I'd loved her. But I also remembered the emails, the stolen money, Trent. Over dinner she laughed, touched my hand, suggested counseling, a perfect setup for a no-fault divorce. I agreed, pretending to play along. The illusion broke when a text from Trent lit up her phone. She lied about it being a client, I smiled, praised her dedication, and quietly planned her downfall. That night I finalized the steps: frozen accounts, ruined reputation, exposure to family and colleagues. The next morning her scream from the kitchen confirmed phase 1. She was on the phone with the bank, furious. "Someone froze our accounts," she said. "Strange," I replied. She stormed out. I called Benny. Phase 1 complete. Phase 2, meetings with regulators, DA, and a reporter, was already underway. Phase 3, evidence packages to everyone she knew. By midday, the investigation had begun. The DA wanted a meeting, and the story was going live. Soon my phone exploded with calls and texts. Nadine, my mother-in-law, sounded shaken. "Please tell me it's not true." "I'm afraid it is." Even Allison's closest allies were calling in tears. Her world was collapsing exactly as I'd planned. "Paul, is this some kind of revenge thing? Are you trying to hurt Allison because you're having problems?" "Sandra, everything in that story is documented and verified. Bank records, photographs, emails. It's all real." "But she loves you." She told me just last week how much she wanted to work on your marriage. Did she also tell you about the divorce lawyers she's been consulting? Or the money she's been stealing from our accounts? The silence stretched so long, I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she whispered, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was this bad. By 3 o'clock, my phone was ringing constantly. Some callers were sympathetic, others were shocked, and a few were angry at me for airing our dirty laundry in public. But the overall reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for. Allison's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time. The most important call came from my daughter's school. The principal wanted to make sure the girls were okay and to discuss how to handle any fallout from the publicity. I assured her that I would pick up Mia and Lila myself and that they would be staying with me until further notice. At 4:30, I was driving to the school when Allison called. Her voice was barely recognizable, hoarse from crying, shaking with rage. You bastard, she said without preamble. You destroyed my life. I didn't destroy anything, I replied calmly. I just told the truth. The truth? You hired some sleazy private investigator to spy on me, then spread lies and rumors to anyone who would listen. Everything in that story is factual and documented. If you think it's defamatory, you're welcome to sue me. Of course, that would mean presenting your side of the story in court under oath. She was quiet for a moment, probably realizing that a lawsuit would only generate more publicity and require her to testify about things she'd rather keep private. What do you want? She asked finally. I want you out of my house by tonight. I want full custody of the girls, and I want you to stay away from my family. You can't do this to me, Paul. I'll fight you. I'll take everything you have. With what money? Your accounts are frozen, your professional license is suspended, and no lawyer in the city will represent you without a substantial retainer. Face it, Allison. You're finished. I hung up before she could respond and continued driving to the school. In a few minutes, I would have to explain to my daughters that their mother wouldn't be coming home tonight. It was going to be the hardest conversation of my life, but it was necessary. The alternative, allowing Allison to continue her deception while planning our family's destruction, was unacceptable. When I arrived at the school, both girls were waiting in the principal's office. Mia looked worried but determined, while Lila seemed confused and frightened. I knelt down to their level and took their hands. Girls, we need to talk about some grown-up problems that Mom and I have been having. Are you getting divorced? Mia asked directly. She'd always been perceptive beyond her years. Yes, sweetheart, we are, and that means some things are going to change. Is it because Mom has a boyfriend? Lila asked quietly. The question hit me like a physical blow. If my 7-year-old knew about Trent, then Allison had been even more careless than I'd realized. How do you know about that, baby? I saw them kissing in our kitchen when you were at work. Mom said it was a secret, and I shouldn't tell anyone. My youngest daughter had been carrying this burden alone, sworn to secrecy by the mother who should have been protecting her innocence. The cruelty of it made me want to drive straight to Allison's office and confront her in front of everyone. Instead, I pulled both girls into a hug and promised them that everything would be okay. They would stay with me, their lives would be as stable as I could make them, and they would never again be asked to keep secrets that weren't theirs to carry. As we drove home, I realized that my revenge was complete. Allison had lost her reputation, her career, her financial security, and most importantly, her family. She would spend years rebuilding her life from the wreckage of her own making. But looking at my daughters in the rearview mirror, I wondered if the victory was worth the cost. They were innocent victims of their mother's choices and my retaliation. Whatever satisfaction I felt from destroying Allison was tempered by the knowledge that Mia and Lila would carry these scars forever. When we pulled into our driveway, Allison's car was gone. She'd taken my ultimatum seriously and cleared out while I was picking up the girls. Part of me had expected a final confrontation, but perhaps she'd realized that her position was hopeless. Inside the house, I found evidence of her hasty departure. Clothes missing from the closet, personal items gone from the bathroom, family photos removed from their frames. She'd taken what she could carry and abandoned the rest, much like she'd done with our marriage. That evening, as I helped the girls with homework and tried to establish some sense of normalcy, I received one final text from my wife. You won. I hope you're satisfied. But remember, Paul, you destroyed their mother. Someday, Mia and Lila will understand what you really are. I deleted the message without responding. Allison was wrong about many things, but she wasn't wrong about the price of my victory. I had destroyed their mother, and my daughters would indeed understand what I was capable of when pushed too far. The question was whether they would forgive me for it. 3 weeks passed in relative quiet. The girls adjusted to their new routine with the resilience that children possess. though I caught them staring at family photos sometimes with expressions too mature for their ages. I'd hired a counselor to help them process the divorce, and slowly we were building a new normal. Allison had moved in with her sister temporarily, her career in ruins and her reputation destroyed. Trent had disappeared entirely. Word was that his gambling debts had finally caught up with him, and he'd left town to avoid his creditors. The real estate firm had fired both of them and was cooperating fully with the criminal investigation. I should have been satisfied. My revenge had been complete and devastating. But something was nagging at me, a sense that the story wasn't quite finished. That feeling proved prophetic when Benny called me at work on a Tuesday afternoon. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "Allison's been meeting with some very expensive lawyers, the kind who specialize in high-stakes custody battles." "With what money?" "Her accounts are still frozen. That's what worries me. Someone's bankrolling her, and they're not doing it out of charity. She's planning something big." That evening, I got my answer. A process server appeared at my door with papers for an emergency custody hearing. Allison was claiming that I had manipulated evidence, violated her privacy, and created an unstable environment for the children. She wanted immediate supervised visitation and a full investigation into my fitness as a parent. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, barely 5 days away. I called my lawyer immediately. David Chen was one of the best family attorneys in Houston, but even he seemed concerned about the short timeline. "This is aggressive, even for emergency proceedings," he said after reviewing the papers. "She's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Invasion of privacy, parental alienation, financial manipulation. It's a kitchen sink approach." Can she win? Honestly, probably not. The evidence against her is overwhelming, and judges don't like parents who steal from their families. But she might be able to muddy the waters enough to get some kind of shared custody arrangement. The thought of my daughters spending weekends with Allison and whatever new boyfriend she'd acquired made my stomach turn. After everything she'd done, the idea that she might still have legal rights to my children seemed obscene. "What do we need to do?" "Prepare for war. She's going to attack your character, your methods, everything. We need to be ready to defend every decision you made." That weekend, I worked with David to prepare my testimony and organize our evidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Allison had something planned that we weren't expecting. She'd been too quiet, too strategic in her approach. This felt like the opening move in a larger game. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I walked into the courthouse. Allison was already there with her legal team, 3 lawyers in expensive suits who looked like they charged more per hour than most people made in a week. She'd transformed her appearance completely. Gone was the polished real estate professional, replaced by a grieving mother figure in a conservative dress and minimal makeup. She looked vulnerable, sympathetic, exactly the image she wanted to project to the judge. When she saw me, her expression shifted to one of wounded dignity. It was a masterful performance, and I had to admire her commitment to the role. The hearing began with her attorney painting me as a controlling, vindictive husband who had violated his wife's privacy and destroyed her reputation out of spite. According to their narrative, Allison had made mistakes, but was trying to work on the marriage when I launched my vicious campaign of harassment and public humiliation. "Your Honor," her lawyer continued, "Mr. Garrett hired private investigators to spy on his wife, illegally accessed her personal communications, and then disseminated private information to the media and her professional contacts. This pattern of behavior demonstrates a concerning disregard for boundaries and a willingness to use the children as weapons in his personal vendetta." It was a compelling argument, and I could see the judge taking notes. They were trying to reframe my methodical documentation of her crimes as obsessive stalking. When it was my turn to testify, David walked me through the timeline of discovery, the overheard phone call, the missing money, the evidence of fraud and embezzlement. We presented bank records, photographs, and email communications that painted a clear picture of Allison's systematic betrayal. "Mr. Garrett," David asked, "why did you choose to make this information public rather than handling it privately?" "Because my wife wasn't just cheating," I replied. "She was stealing from our family, committing fraud with her business partner, and planning to leave me with nothing while taking custody of our children. This wasn't a private marital dispute. It was criminal activity that affected our entire community." Allison's attorney objected, but the judge allowed my answer to stand. I could see doubt creeping into his expression as he reviewed the financial evidence. Then Allison took the stand, and I watched her transform into the wounded victim once again. She admitted to the affair, but claimed it was the result of feeling neglected and unappreciated in her marriage. She acknowledged taking money from joint accounts, but characterized it as securing funds for the children's future. "I was scared," she said, tears streaming down her face. Paul had become so cold and distant. I felt like I was losing my husband and my family. Yes, I made mistakes, but I never stopped loving my daughters or wanting what was best for them. It was a virtuoso performance, and I could see it was having an effect on the judge. She was rewriting history, casting herself as the victim of an unhappy marriage rather than the architect of its destruction. But then her attorney made a critical error. In trying to establish that I was unfit to have sole custody, he brought up my obsessive investigation and asked whether I'd involved the children in my surveillance activities. Did your husband ever ask you or the children to spy on Mrs. Garrett or report on her activities? No, Allison admitted, but the girls were affected by his constant suspicion and questioning. They became anxious and withdrawn. David immediately stood up. Objection, Your Honor. If Mr. Garrett never involved the children in his investigation, how would Mrs. Garrett know about their alleged emotional state? She wasn't living in the home during this period. The judge sustained the objection, but the damage was done. Allison had contradicted her own timeline and revealed that she didn't actually know how the children had been affected by the situation. David pressed the advantage during cross-examination. Mrs. Garrett, you testified that the children became anxious and withdrawn due to your husband's behavior. But isn't it true that you moved out of the family home 3 weeks ago? Yes. And isn't it true that you've had only supervised visitation with your daughters since then? Yes, but... So your testimony about their current emotional state is based on what exactly? Observation during 1-hour supervised visits? Allison's composure finally cracked. I know my children. I can see that they've been turned against me. Turned against you by whom? By him, she said, pointing at me. He's poisoned them against their own mother. Mrs. Garrett, are you aware that your 7-year-old daughter witnessed you kissing Mr. Collins in the family kitchen? The courtroom went silent. Allison's face went white, and her attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. Are you aware that this same child was sworn to secrecy about what she'd seen? That she was carrying the burden of your affair because you told her it was their special secret? That's not... She misunderstood what she saw. Did you or did you not tell Lila Garrett to keep your relationship with Mr. Collins secret from her father? Allison looked at her lawyers desperately, but there was no objection that could save her. I was trying to protect her. Protect her from what? From the truth about her mother's behavior? The judge called for a recess, but the hearing was effectively over. Allison's credibility was destroyed, and her claim that I had turned the children against her rang hollow when faced with evidence that she had involved them in her deception. When we reconvened, the judge's ruling was swift and decisive. I would retain sole custody of both children, with Allison granted supervised visitation every other weekend pending completion of family counseling and a psychological evaluation. Mrs. Garrett, the judge said sternly, your conduct throughout this marriage has been reprehensible. You stole from your family, committed fraud with your business partner, and worst of all, you involved your young children in your deception. While Mr. Garrett's methods may have been aggressive, they were legal and justified given the circumstances. This court will not reward your behavior with custody rights. As we left the courthouse, Allison tried one last desperate gambit. She approached me in the parking lot, her lawyers trailing behind. Paul, please, she said, dropping the victim act for the first time all day. Don't do this to me. I made mistakes, but I'm still their mother. You stopped being their mother the day you decided to destroy our family, I replied. You made your choice, Allison. Now live with it. I'll appeal this decision. I'll fight you until I get my girls back. With what money? Your legal fees today probably cost more than you'll make this year. Face reality. You lost. Completely and permanently. She stared at me with pure hatred, and for a moment, I saw the real Allison beneath all the masks she wore. Cold, calculating, and utterly without remorse for what she'd done to our family. You think you've won, she said quietly. But you've turned yourself into something ugly, Paul. Something your daughters will eventually see and hate. Maybe, I admitted. But they'll never have to wonder if their father loved them enough to fight for them. That evening, I picked up Mia and Lila from school and took them out for ice cream to celebrate. They didn't need to know the details of the custody hearing, but they deserved to know that their future was secure. Dad, Mia said as we sat in the ice cream parlor, are you and Mom ever going to be friends again? I thought about the question carefully. My daughters needed to believe that their parents could coexist peacefully, even if we couldn't be married. I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. Right now, Mom and I are both hurt and angry. But maybe someday we can find a way to be civil for your sake. It was the best answer I could give, even though I knew it probably wasn't true. The damage between Allison and me was too severe, the betrayal too complete. We would never be friends, never find common ground beyond our shared love for our children, but that was enough. It had to be enough. As we drove home, I realized that my revenge was finally complete. Not because I had destroyed Allison's life, though I had, but because I had protected my daughters from further harm. They would grow up knowing that their father had fought for them when it mattered most. The cost had been high. I'd lost my faith in marriage, my trust in the woman I'd loved for 20 years, and perhaps some essential part of my own humanity. But my girls were safe, and their future was secure. In the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered.